will be joining in the next 5 minutes, but let's start. So my name is Lena Olena. I am from Ukraine, Kharkiv originally, have been living and working in Wrocław for the past 2 years. I've been with Grid Dynamics more than 2 years, and I'm a recruitment lead here, responsible for actually hiring in Poland and in our other European locations. I will be just presenting the company for those of you who haven't heard about us, for those who are the first time on our events. But I'm sure there are not that many people who haven't heard about us, I hope, in Wrocław especially, because we've been around for some time. And let me proceed. Okay, yeah. So Grid Dynamics, we're a leading provider of technology consulting services for quite famous companies. Most of them are from enterprise segment. And yeah, we've been on the market since 2006, and actually we are celebrating our 18th birthday next week. Yeah, we've had a wonderful photo shooting for this occasion yesterday. Yeah, and we are doing like a lot of cool stuff for a lot of cool clients. Some of them you can see on the screen. I'm sure you recognize a lot of brands, and we are proud to be a trusted partner for those companies. Our main focus is on I would say manufacturing, CPG, healthcare, insurance, and finance domains, as well as retail and famous brands that we work for. Like we've been working with them, with some of them for like 10 years. And we are proud to like contribute to their digital modernization. So just for the past years, I think we've been into more into financial banking domain. So if some of you are interested in joining like project from financial domain, you definitely can check our open positions, because we have plenty of them. Yeah, from clients to our geography. So we are present in United States, in Europe, in India, in Jamaica, and I would say in Europe, Poland. Yeah, definitely Poland is our biggest location. We crossed, we crossed 1,000 people in Poland. And in Wrocław, it is more than 200. Actually, it's almost 250 already. And we keep growing. We are growing organically. We are acquiring some companies to, I would say, strengthen our expertise. Yeah, so when it comes to our technical focus and expertise that we are proud of, it's actually DevOps and clouds. We do a lot of projects where we offer like this cloud migration services, DevSecOps, to help our clients to migrate from on-premises to cloud infrastructure, a lot of stuff. And we are proud to have partnerships with Google Cloud, Azure, and AWS. And we have more than 50 certificates actually in the company. And as far as I know, every fourth engineer is certified at Grid Dynamics. So this is something that we are like investing into. But apart from clouds, we provide like Java is our primarily programming language for enterprise software development. We also do a lot of projects related to AI right now, and Gen AI has been a buzzword for I would say 2023, 2024, and of course we are embarking on this journey with Gen AI, with a lot of projects related to data science, ML, expertise, and this is something that we are actively growing in the company. And we have like 10 main disciplines: quality engineering, DevOps, search as a separate discipline, big data, of course, data science and ML, as I mentioned, data analytics, custom development, meaning Ruby, Python, .NET, all like these languages. Of course, your UI, UX, business system analysis, and mobile development also present. So why it is great to be part of Grid Dynamics? Because like for me personally, what I value is corporate culture, of course, and how much the company is investing into our professional growth and development. I already mentioned all kinds of certifications that you can get. Also, we do a lot of internship programs, and every fifth engineer in Grid Dynamics is actually ex-intern. So this is great when we give opportunity to learn, to grow with us, and we gain a lot of loyal people. Okay, but also, I mean, locally here in Wrocław and in our other locations, we have a great culture of spending time together, movie nights, kayaking. You organized a wonderful kayaking trip this summer, like some holidays like Halloween to celebrate, regular breakfasts with the colleagues, pizza days, a lot of fun, some workshops. This is something that also helps us to feel united, to feel the part of the company culture. But we also help to develop your professional career paths, and we have a system of SSLs, specialization leads, who actually help you to clearly build your professional development path, follow it. You have a mentor if you need it. So we have a clear system of grades in the company and competences related to these grades. So you have an opportunity to grow from technical position into architect position, or into maybe delivery management role if you're interested in. So several options are also there on the table for you. Okay, and I think that it's in a nutshell it. We are an international company, so you will have colleagues if you join, us in the nearest future. You will have colleagues from different countries, which I think is a great opportunity to learn how to work in an international environment. Clients also from all over the world, mainly like United States and Europe, but still like we're expanding. Yeah, and actually, the opportunity to have fun and enjoy your work and enjoy your time being a part of Grid Dynamics, this is something for sure we can promise. Like we offer, like I would say, quite competitive benefit package, great atmosphere for you guys to work and enjoy your working, and a lot of courses and trainings that I already mentioned. That we had a huge platform, Grid University, where you can find a lot of courses to enhance your, I would say, capabilities. If you're interested to check more on our maybe positions, or if you want to recommend as a friend, you can check our career website. And I'm here for you, available after the dynamic talk to discuss maybe if we can be a good match, or whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer. And it would be great if you would follow us on LinkedIn, not to miss some interesting events, updates, whatever. Thank you for your time. I tried to make it quick and informative. And I think I will pass the mic to Kiladze, who is our speaker today.
Thank you, Lena. And while Geo is connecting his presentation, I want to add some rules about our presentation today, as usual. So as we have offline and online part. So during the online part, please be muted so you'll not interrupt our participants and our speaker. And you can ask your questions in the chat and we will answer them during the Q&A session. We will have it after the presentation. Thank you. And Gio, if you're ready, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you, Irvina. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's get started. I'm very thrilled to be talking to you today about data culture. But before we do get started, just a few brief words about myself. My name is Gio. I'm from Moscow. I've studied mathematics in Scotland, and I've been living in Poland for almost 3 years. I'm in the data juggling industry for about 8 years, and I worked as a part of audit, consulting, security, and development teams across a variety of industries such as retail, manufacturing, and pharma. I'm a staff data analyst here at Grid Dynamics, and my favorite kind of projects usually revolve around optimizing business processes. The agenda we have for today is rather straightforward. We'll first discuss what data is, then take a look at how and by whom it is used around us, and then move on to defining data culture and its 4 contributing components: the human element of it, and the principles of data engineering, data security, and data interpretation. After that, we will have a brief hands-on on how to build a data-driven app using Google Workspace, and wrap it all up with a few last words and a brief Q&A session. Without further ado, let's get started. So, what is data? I get asked this question a lot, and more things about data. I guess it has something to do with me being a data analyst, but before we get to that, just maybe you guys could share what is the meaning you put into data? Does anyone have an opinion?
It's just bits.
That's a practical way to look at it, yeah?
Structured information.
Very good. That's realistic, yeah. Well, actually, this does wrap it up in the way I was looking at it as well. Data is facts, and in our modern age, it is usually digitized facts. And the facts themselves strive to be equivalent to truth, but they usually highly depend on the prisms of the definitions we use. So in that sense, data is anything we decide for it to be. All right. Now let's take a look at who uses data, and I want to start with the enthusiasts or the high-end performers. Well, these guys usually use data points when sharing their achievements or defining themselves and their ambitions. Each niche has their own vocabulary, and even though individuals might have their unique strategies towards working towards this end metrics, the end results are usually made objective by a certain set of rules and circumstances in place. Examples, of course, include athletes, teams of athletes, students, artists, gamers, software developers, you name it. And those of us who don't use any data or fake it eventually get discredited. Moving on, the scientists. These guys apply statistical analysis to data when proving or disproving a particular hypothesis or theorem. They sample data, they test their theories, and keep in mind all the limitations that should be taken into account. Examples, of course, include medical research, climate and social studies, biology, physics, and, well, science, you know. If you ignore data or design data around the desired answers, well, sooner or later, you will be discredited and the findings will be moved to the dump. The corporations, well, they use and manage data using such things as ERPs, CRMs, IoTs, and other fancy abbreviated data handling systems in hope to translate data into business insight. And of course, decisions here are usually assisted by numerous dashboards, system prompts, and of course, spreadsheets and slides. Examples include A/B tests using user data, financial reporting, assembling digital twins like with using process mining technology, and some fraud monitoring. Companies that do not use data or ignore it rarely win customers, investors, and usually suffer with their own growth and audits. Next group of people is usually the governments, but I don't have the desire to turn this into political debate, so let's just say this much. Collect too much data and you risk into turning into a big brother-like fanatic, and collect too little or don't make any use of it, and then your present will never learn from the past. So here, again, not to make it weird, I'll leave the examples up to you. And instead, let's just have a quick show of hands, do a bit of warm-up. So how many of you are happy with the way data is handled in your primary organization, be it your company, your university, or your country? All right. Sergey is happy, that's good. Well, maybe after today's presentation, we will have more inspiration to change some of this more proactively, you know. Okay, well, I guess by now we should all feel confident when saying that the modern world generally is data-driven. And in fact, we don't need to belong to any of the aforementioned groups to benefit from data in our day-to-day lives. It's about time we acknowledge that being data-driven is just a part of being human. And it's not a secret tool inaccessible to most of us. We are the data culture. Yeah, that's attitude. The more we embrace it, the more data there is, and the more data there is, the more we embrace it. So perpetual motion in a way. Each one of us has a powerful supercomputer, not this thing, but our brain. And it digests and translates data into facts and into actions. It is our individual responsibility to be aware of the features and the bugs of these supercomputers to make sure we can make every tomorrow even greater than today. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher with a beautiful set of mustache, once said to his sister that if you wish to strive for peace of soul and pleasure, then believe. But if you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire. I suggest that looking at the world and the data we choose to populate it with in a kind and humble, yet an eager and ever open-minded way will help us to become the knights of truth who are also at peace with ourselves. Think of a small acorn that grows into a mighty oak. Well, every great thing starts with a small beginning. Only imagine the globe-spanning forest our society will continue to grow into, given the right vectors of individual attitudes. Philosophy aside, let's take a look at the more practical concepts, and let's start with the human element of data culture. Of course, that's assuming at least some of us are humans, but I'll leave this up to you as well. It's all about how we look at it, right? Because we are the humans. Relying too much on data can lead us into the rabbit hole of believing that we are in control of things, in the way in control of the situation and how things play out. But in reality, this is never the case. And the only thing we actually control are our intentions, actions, and what we initiate, the action that we initiate, and the definitions of the data we rely on in our interpretations. With saying that, I think it's important to say that it's not possible to optimize something without monitoring it first. And in that sense, labeling and ordering things is usually aimed at removing layers of abstraction and complexity, but a part of something is rarely ever greater than the whole. For assumptions and conclusions only bloom and blossom in the vacuum-like context of the original definitions. Applying such conclusions should be done with great care, for the direction of the wind cannot tell us how and when an individual leaf will respond to it, nor do quantum principles tell us much about the emotions that we, creatures of atomic composition, experience. This inherent complexity of human experience should remind us that data, while incredibly powerful, is just a tool. And with such a tool comes a great responsibility of wielding it ethically to make sure we uplift and empower each other instead of discriminating and exploiting. So data should be wielded ethically, ensuring fairness, transparency, and respect for individual privacy. Let's look at even more practical aspects of data culture. And let's start with data engineering. We all probably know that our result is only ever as good as what comes in. And in that sense, garbage in, garbage out. And this is where data quality actually starts to be of value. We always want our data to be credible, complete, timely, accurate, and well, reliable. Then there is the concept of atomic data, or ensuring atomicity. And this is about ensuring that we store as little data within one cell as possible without still losing the main point of it. So instead of, for example, putting in one cell called book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy 1972 sci-fi Douglas Adams, we perhaps want to split it into several blocks and saying what is the title, what is the year of publishment, what is the author, etc. This will help us to interpret our data better, to keep it scalable, and to well manage it in an easier way. Next comes in the data granularity, and this is actually helping us to think of the contributing components, and especially when we want to consider macro versus micro scale of things. For example, it might make sense sometimes to look at the GDP of the whole world, but sometimes at the GDP of a particular country. Sometimes we might want to see the timeline of data, and sometimes all of it combined. Documentation is critical because always it helps us and others in the future to go back to the approach and we took towards acquisition, transformation, and modeling of the data to when it is formed in a matter of words and diagrams rather than just code. And in that sense, repeatability is also something about today and even more about tomorrow, when we might want to come back to our process to seamlessly acquire more data with a new sample, or to potentially slightly tweak it and get a slightly different perspective. Next comes the data security. And first and foremost is the personal data protection. Our friends, partners, customers, and employees entrust us with personal information. It's our duty to treat it with utmost respect and to adhere to data regulation protections. It is a sacred pact and the promise that we make to keep sure that their data is safe and secure. Most of us heard this adage of an American vigilante, that with great power comes great responsibility. And well, when handling sensitive data, such techniques as data anonymization and data garbling are actually critical because they allow us to analyze the trends that lie within the data and the patterns without exposing individual identities. So think of it as preserving the melody of the data while still changing most of the lyrics. And data separation. Remember the old saying, don't put all of the eggs in one basket? Whereas this is exactly where it comes in. We want to make sure that we separate sensitive information into different compartments, and we limit the damage of a potential breach in that sense. So imagine a fortress that is built in multiple layers so that even if one wall is breached, it still remains strong. This is why on your credit card, for example, the number is written on one side, but then the CVV code is written on the back. All right, now that we know how to engineer data and make sure it's more or less secure, let's talk about how to interpret this data. First and foremost, keep asking questions until you really understand what is going on. And after that, get even more context. And this is where the 80-20 principle comes in. So we want to ideally find the 20% of the categories that help us to reach 80% of the results. Because the decision should never be driven by a single number. We should always expect the bad news. Humans rarely focus on improving something that is already working well, and generally prefer to look at things that are not working so well. So in that sense, if we expect something to go wrong, we will already be at least mentally prepared. Estimate the risks before hitting the panic button. Risk is equal to probability times danger. And depending on your circumstances and individual preferences, sometimes you could and maybe should be more afraid of being hit by a snowball than being struck by lightning. Acknowledge the outliers. Do not ignore them, because sometimes working through them can actually help us to look at the edge cases and solve the entire problem. For example, addressing problematic business units rather than trying to implement a universal thing. And this is where the second concept about outliers comes in. Beware of the outliers when making the decisions that mostly apply to the average that lies between them. Most of us would probably be unhappy about the universal tax policy that ignores all other circumstances, for example. More of the data interpretation principles. And whilst the slide is on, you could actually potentially take a look at the two of my favorite books that helped me to get less overwhelmed by data and more fascinated by it. Beware of the generalizations and answers driven by category. This is where stereotypes usually come in. We should be looking for differences within the category, as well as for similarities and differences across the categories. For example, it would be quite weird to say that all of the left-wing political parties in Europe are the same. And in the same bullet point, we should also mention that the majority usually can mean both 51% and 99%. We should beware of the straight line trends and seasonalities. Trends do come in different sizes and shapes, but straight lines are almost never the answer. We don't expect our children to grow exponentially or linearly till well, forever, but sometimes we expect our investments to. We should always challenge our own ideas and staying constructive, because stress testing usually brings the truth to the surface, and looking for causes rather than individual heroes or villains is usually a good approach towards staying constructive and actually solving the problem. All right. Now let's get this slightly liven up. Let's play a little game. Now that we can interpret the data, in front of you, there are 3 statements, 2 of which are truth and 1 of which is a lie. I'm sure most of you can read, but I'll read it out anyway. The largest data breach in history exposed personal information of over 3 billion users. Data analysis of online dating profiles has shown that people who list pizza as their favorite food are more likely to get matches. Over 80% of the world's population, of the world's data, has been created in the last 3 years alone. So let's have a quick show of hands again. Who thinks the first statement is a lie? All right, that's about a quarter of you. Who thinks the second one is a lie? Okay, that's probably slightly more, maybe a third. And well, I guess we could leave the third one out, but no. Who thinks the third statement is a lie? Okay, that's about the same as for the first one. So majority of you voted for the second one, but it is actually true. The lie is the first statement, because actually in the data breach by Yahoo between 2013 and 2016, it did expose data of around 3 billion users, not 3 billion people, even though when I was saying it out loud, I gave it away a bit. I did say users, but still, even me, myself, I have more than 5 or 6 accounts in Google alone. So it just shows 3 billion users being affected. That's still quite a lot. All right, now let's get to building a data-driven app. But before we do that, I'll just have a small announcement. We'll have a small challenge. So when we'll be looking at this concept I'll be defining now, with taking a look at business process and building a data app, think of the things we've just discussed and try to apply it to the setup we will be looking at. So authors of the best ideas that resonate with the main topic, that will contribute to how to improve our solution or find flaws in it, will actually win some prizes, and you can already get excited by looking at them. So let's do it. So the first step to building an app or a system. Ideally, we want to start with understanding exactly what it is that we're building, right? It would be weird to start building a home without really having any foundation or any plan, just building on the go. I mean, that's the way some projects are run, of course, but it's not ideal. We should understand the processes we are facilitating and the questions we're trying to answer. After that, we should understand whether we know the data that works best for the defined flow. And potentially, is there a way to eliminate some of the flaws that will arise with the data that when it continues to fly in? All right, once we thought about that, can we foresee some of the changes that we would want to implement once we're done with the prototype? If so, that's a good start, because it's always good to think about something that just potentially not the 3,000 steps ahead, but at least one step ahead. Because once we have a good foundation in place, and we know exactly what we'll be testing and tracking, our data requests will start to form themselves. Collecting data without purpose can be fun, but it does get quite inconvenient, and it can be even expensive. I think that to start using data on a smaller scale, perhaps even a personal scale or a small business scale, you don't really need a cloud database. And I would putting my hand on my heart, say that a spreadsheet can usually suffice, really. So with giving away the keyword of the spreadsheet, they will be looking at building an app using Google Workspace. I'm sure most of you are familiar with at least some of the services, but if you're not, please scan this QR code and you can read this in more details. We will be building an app with not all of these services, but with a few of them. So let's take a look at our use case. We will take a simplified approach to sales while skipping most of the accounting out of the process. And our hypothetical CEO, Mr. John, is buying bulk goods from vendors and sells them to individual customers with a pricing markup. So to do that, primarily to sell goods to the customers, those customers file their purchase request on our website. Our sales people confirm this purchase request via a sales order. We schedule a delivery. Customer receives the delivery and leaves us some feedback. Easy peasy. But to accommodate that, we actually need an internal process as well. It might look similar but reversed, but it clearly serves a different purpose. And as we scale, we might actually want to remember that things do tend to change because they are organic. New steps could appear in our processes, existing ones could be removed, things could be merged, split, or even abandoned overall for a better alternative. So again, thinking ahead and test driving the future really helps. And GenAI can actually help you here. Asking ChatGPT or Google Gemini some questions after giving a very specific prompt can actually do miracles. I'm sure most of you know that. And why not try it together right here? We could actually ask Gemini to act as a professional data architect with a system analyst experience and to design a schema that will help us to take a look at an inventory log and some master data tables for an electronics shop. And we also want to have a sample of this data. So convenient that this prompt was already written. Instead of doing it here, even though it does answer our questions rather quickly and even gives us additional description, which we didn't ask for, and seeing some samples for the data. I hope most of you can see this. It's not too small. Does exactly what we asked. gives us data types, constraints. Very good, right? Alternatively, instead of doing it through the prompt right here, we could do it through Google Sheet itself. Might take a bit of time, but not too much time. Oh, not bad. I think the first shot was actually better, but we could always give it more specific requests and play around with that. In that sense, I don't want to look at this data because I prefer the one we just saw there. And we could conveniently export it directly to Sheets as well. That's quite handy. All right, let's close Gemini and come back to our presentation. The architecture setup we'll be looking at today actually revolves around things hosted in Google. It has a Google Sites, where we have a simple website that our users can simply go and refer the products we sell to. It also has all the relevant links to our feedback forms, to our purchase requests, and well, it's quite convenient. These forms are connected to the Sheets, which are also hosted in Google Drive, and to which, in that sense, act as a core, data core of our setup. The Sheets are connected to Google Looker, which is an offering living outside of the Google Workspace, but it's free, and it helps us to work with interactive dashboards and take a higher look at the picture from a high perspective. There's also app scripts, which is something like macros, but connected to Google Sheets. They are connected to our Sheets and act as a custom business logic center. And they actually send notifications directly to our Google Mail. There is also AppSheet, last but not least, which is exactly the mobile application we'll be looking at in more detail. And given slight time constraints today, we will not be looking at all of these things, even though we could after the session is ending or during a Q&A session. But today we'll be mostly focused on just these three. So let's do it. Let me know if any of you don't see this, but I hope you will, given the 200 zoom I'm going to show you. The data model we have in place is actually rather straightforward. Most of the things have a one-to-one relationship. A few have a one-to-many. The business process we have already discussed. And in the top right corner, if you refer to the presentation later on, has a few high-level improvements that could be done to the setup. So as we walk through our business process, we start with the purchase requests that people leave through our website. And these are the things that do get digested by our sales representatives. There are not many, just now there is only one, and it is a month old. But let's hope that our sales reps will get onto it. Then there is the inventory table, which is actually containing all of the sales orders and purchase orders. So not going to dive into the details of every individual field, but you do see that it has some things like the vendor, the customer or receiver, prices, total amounts, planned delivery, the actual delivery date, statuses, some things hosted in Google Drive, like we were saying, in invoices like images and things. So, oh, that's quite convenient. Moving on, we actually have the master data for our products, which also contains some IDs, names and descriptions of the items, some images hosted in Google Drive, more IDs for the category of the item, the vendor that sells it to us, and some metrics. Some of them, well, metrics, and sometimes they could be looked at in a different way, but in our case, they are. The purchase cost and sale prices you can see on the top are static for our setup, and this is usually the limitation of a smaller scale business. But as we move further to the right, we see that actually formulas start to appear, and this is where spreadsheets thrive, right? We can move these things around, and this is what business users just love, that you can drag things over and define it and redefine it. It's so flexible, right? So actually lead time is the usual time between our order and the time that the vendor delivers, well, promises to deliver the order to us. The reorder point and sales column, sales over 7 days columns are quite similar, but they show us the average sales that have been happening for that particular product over the last 30 days and 7 days. For 30 days, this is something, the minimum level of we want to keep our products at, so that we don't potentially run out of the products when the big order comes in. There's also an average delay calculated here quite dynamically, which does take the difference between the promised delivery date by the vendor and the factual delivery date. Moving on, we have our very small but not very insignificant product dictionary, product category dictionary. Similar schema to before, but just basic minimal information. Same thing with vendors, some contact information, and well, their logos and IDs, things like that. And then we have some feedbacks that our customers left for us, order IDs, their emails, some feedback rated from 1 to 5, and some worded feedback. Some are less happy, some are more happy. That's just, well, the reality of fabricated feedback, right? Moving on, let's actually take a look at how all of this data is enriched by custom business logic. I'm not going to go through the details of this script with you, but what you need to know is that this script assists us on a regular and automated basis with the feedbacks we're receiving, because the feedback form we have on our website, it is just a link. So in a way, if anyone got a hold of that link and just typed in some bad feedback, which would then be pushed back to the website, this would be an easy way to jeopardize us. And well, we don't want that. So there is a little trick of actually making sure that the feedbacks left have something to do with the orders we digest. And the feedbacks we receive, they're actually being checked on whether the order number and the customer ID or customer email, they match. If they don't, then the feedback is getting deleted. And that's the first part of the script. And the second one is actually taking a look at the rating left in the feedback itself. If it's below 3, then we automatically get an email, and well, we can reach out directly to the customer and find out what was it that went wrong. Was it something to do with us? Was it the vendor? And well, to kind of work through that. Another script which is even longer, but not it's not about the size, right? So we should actually know that this script helps us to check stock levels on an automated basis. It runs on every single day in the evening, and in case it recognizes that some of our products are at a level below the level we defined within the sheet we looked in, actually right here, the reorder point. If the orders we placed throughout the day do get us to the level below the minimum one, we automatically get an email, which gives us a summary of exactly what we need to do to get back to where we need to be. Let's take a look. I really hope I just received an email from myself. I did. Look at that. Let me just make it even larger. And here, instead of looking directly through every single table and pivot potentially, every day I automatically get an email about directly who I need to reach out to, about which product. And in that case, we need to reach out to 3 vendors. And in that sense, we could already shoot an email right here and now without even thinking additionally about that. So that's some custom business logic realized directly right here. Cool. That's the app scripts that act as macros and enrich our setup with custom business logic. And let's also take a look at app sheet, which is actually the cherry on top of our setup and helps us to look at the mobile application itself. So before we actually look at the application, I'll just tell you a few words about the thing itself, the service. It helps us to connect to Google Drive hosted data objects. define a few critical fields, perhaps add a few calculated columns if we need to, show, hide something, and basically connect the data model. We then define the views or the setups that will be present in our data and our application. Define a few actions we want users to be able to do whilst exploring this application. And then, well, we get to the application itself. Let me open it on the larger screen. This is what it looks like. And this is entirely based on the Google Sheet we just looked at, which is quite a cool thing. I will make it like slightly more zoomed in. It might look a bit uglier, but at least we will all see what's happening. So this helps us to explore exactly what we were looking at. So we could take a look at an individual product and see all the data about it, who we're buying it from, what is the category, well, all the things we already saw. And in that sense, if we didn't want someone from our team to have access to the data sheet themselves, because that's potentially the core of our operations, we could just give them access to this application and give them, for example, only read access or only add new data, for example, so that they would be able to do all the operations they need without potentially triggering or like tampering with the data. We could look at individual products. We could look at categories and see statistics for them right through here on the main tab. And of course, there are more categories, and there are things like that. There is also a view at the inventory log, where we see all of the operations we saw in the inventory sheet. There is some high-level info. If we wanted to, we could add a row right here, which would be added automatically to our Google Sheet. Or we could edit an existing one. For example, this order just got accepted, and we can add a quick signature here. Ah, awesome. Now this will be pushed into the Google Drive. Fantastic. There's also high-level reporting here available for our warehouse operators or whoever we give this access to. Of course, it looks differently if we have normal zoom, but here, for the sake of the numbers, well, we will just make it like that. And everything is very customizable, and so people can make it exactly how they want to have it. There are drill downs available, so people could, well, take a look at how much of the Ego Ultimate Lego set we have, for example, and then get directly to the toy in question itself. And there is, of course, the information about our vendors and everything we just looked at. So we could, for example, see how dependent we are on this vendor. Well, we have still some items in stock, but for the Theta Burak, we have nothing in stock, and maybe that's okay. All right, with all this discussed, we also have a side menu where we might want to hide some of the things that is not for our daily use, but all of the feedbacks are here, grouped by the products. And there is even a brief voice assistant right here. So if, for example, if we wanted to look at the inventory of the toys, it would show it to us right here as well. That's quite convenient. This kind of wraps it up with the setup and the things we want to discuss about that today. We might have some time to look at the other pieces of the application later on, after the demo, as I said, or during the Q&A session, if it's a surprisingly interesting question. And now let's actually wrap the whole presentation up by saying a few last words. So we did discuss that data can be sourced from anywhere, well, almost anywhere. Sky and our imagination is the limit. It can be processed and enriched in almost any way. And once we actually learn how to understand the data and describe it, we can move on to prescribing some actions and attempting to model and what if the future. With this in mind, I want to reiterate that data culture is not about numbers and algorithms, it's about unlocking our human potentials. Let's harness this power wisely, ethically, and always with a dash of curiosity. Happy dating. Right, now we have time for Q&A, and don't forget about the competition I announced slightly earlier. So if you have any ideas about how to improve the setup we looked at, or you see any big flaws with it, this is the time to discuss it. The floor is yours.
I have a question regarding the Gemini you use. So you are using the Gemini and the whole data you are pushing, so it's going to Google. How do you secure your data so it won't be leaked online? Keep the integrity of the data.
Great question. I'll also repeat it for those of us online. The question was about the use of Gemini and how we want to make sure that potentially something is not leaked to, well, Google and the open internet. In this setup, I was actually using our corporate Google and corporate Gemini. I did close it already, but at the bottom it did say that because it is a corporate Gemini, that no data is being sent to Google. So in that sense, I feel completely safe. At the same time, I wouldn't be using corporate Gemini for my like side electronics shop hustle, right? So it really depends on the question and on the setup. Generally, because we have the Google Gemini in our Google Workspace connected to our corporation, we even feel safe using it to summarize our emails, which can be highly sensitive. In that sense, we put all of the trust to Google themselves. And I guess of course, we could be let down, but then everybody else in the world would also be. So, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, we have to trust Google.
In that sense, yeah. There is a certain level of trust, and this is why we talked about data security. Yeah, thank you.
So my question is basically about not trusting Google, but also it's about the future. Let's say, for example, about the scalability for the future. Let's say your shop becomes very famous and I don't know, you had some few orders and now you have like 1 million orders suddenly. And I see that you put all of the whole solution is based on Google, you know, and does it scale up to this huge, for example, expansion in sales and orders and all this? Because I don't know, honestly, I don't have big experience with Google Workspace, but I'm not sure how much it would scale up. Also, the fact that you're using for every little, let's say, call it services, like, you know, every little service or every little part, also like a Google product under the Workspace. I think for a tiny solution, I think this is okay. But if you're looking at the long run, at the scalability, if you are very ambitious and you want to basically, I don't know, build the next Amazon. So, in my opinion, I think you need to reconsider, maybe also diversify also a bit, like maybe not necessarily use like maybe like Google Sheets, but maybe some small free database, maybe MySQL or something, then the scalability will be easier after. And the other thing is also about in generic also it's about being locked in by one vendor. It's also you need to consider what if I decided just to migrate from Google completely. What if Google came tomorrow and said, you know what, you'll have to pay 10 times what you'll have to pay. So I think also it's one point to consider also.
For sure, great question. Thank you so much. I will also repeat this for those online. So this was mostly about the limitations of the current setup and how would it tackle the scalability and potentially limitations of being stuck to one vendor only, especially in case of any dependencies and like, well, even time downs, I suppose. Great question. I think before I answer it, I'll just also say that migration is usually the worst if we're not prepared for it. But if we are, it's actually like just a normal thing. This is quite a significant portion of the projects we actually do help to migrate from one thing to another and things like that. In this case, I do agree with you in saying that it's not the best to be stuck to one vendor, but this was mostly an entry point. Yeah, so to start, you don't actually need to look through loads of vendors, think what is the best for me, for my use case, what are their offerings. this thing we looked at and the other services connected to it are completely free. It could get you kickstarted, and then if you wanted and you were happy and you already know what schema works for you, you could already actually understand, like, okay, what do I need to scale first? Given I have my dashboards, which we didn't look at, but they're connected to the schema, they're still working fine. I don't want to pay anything extra for Google Looker, for example, then I'll just keep that. But the database, I will migrate. I will potentially go to GCP, set up a free tier database, and then once the free tier is also not working, or we could not stuck to Google, we could go to AWS or Azure and just start with as little as we need, and to make sure it answers our needs, and then scale more. Of course, like there are several approaches towards it, but given the small scale, I think it's quite tackleable. But in terms of dependencies to one vendor, this is actually the reason I personally manage some of my finances, like health tracking and everything, through the sheets instead of depending on apps, because I want my own flexibility for data. I want to not be dependent on any subscription, and I want to be able to, if anything, extract the data. And in that sense, data is the most sacred thing for me. And once we have it, it's easy to move it to a different place. Hope I answered your question. Oh, God, who was first?
Thank you for this input. First part, philosophical question about collaborate your own opinion about protect time.
It's very deep, and I think there are also many perspectives. And I will repeat this again. I guess I got carried away by the fact that it is about the philosophical part. The question from the audience was about the fact that whether we want to collect more data or collect less data and be more respectful of individual privacy. I think this is almost an existential question. Of course, it's good to have data to make conclusions, but then we as humans always struggle to trust each other. And in that sense, we almost need like an outer entity to make sure that, well, the third one in the room, ensuring that the first two can trust each other. So in that sense, I feel like we're still somewhere to go in the future, somewhere to go and find the best way. I personally think if all the principles of how data is stored are made extremely public and extremely transparent, then the more data could lead us to actually being, like, as I said, like to a better tomorrow. But I know that it can be very easily exploited. So I'm not sure how to tackle the human nature, but I think I truly believe that transparency and honesty can actually be, well, in a way, like, you know, lighting a light in the room, it leaves almost no room for a shadow in that sense. So if we're all ensure that light is going through all directions, then it will be much harder for any shadow or any like bad intentions to actually appear.
So models are open source.
Yeah.
Transparency and privacy are two opposite things.
Yeah. Sure, Andrei.
So the question is about data itself. So as you described at the beginning, that it's better to divide data and different access for its parts. So maybe to divide the, now in the sheet you have all the data, like with personal details and so on, maybe to divide it into some parts. I'm not sure about support of shared access for different people in the sheets, if it's possible, but maybe somehow divide the data and to divide access for different data for different people in the company, to hide personal data maybe, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first question. And the second question, what would you advise to buy in your shop before like Black Friday? Because
I'll again reiterate the question. So the first part was mostly about the fact that we might want to separate some of the things that are lying right now in one Excel sheet, because like, as we were saying, data separation and data like anonymization could be good. And the second part was about what would I recommend to buy from my shop. I will tackle the second one first. I'll say it's a fake shop. You cannot buy anything. I mean, you could send me the money, but you will not get a single thing. I'm sorry, guys. So Black Friday is going to be white for me in that sense. And the first question, I fully agree. It's a good point. I actually, for the feedbacks part, which I didn't show to you, but which is the sheet which is connected to the feedbacks, it actually pulls only some of the data from the original table into another one, but this is generally the right direction to go into. I think this is the safer way to store private data, addresses, and like contact information to keep it away from potential sales operators, and because potentially only warehouse guys need to know that, and even then only one at a time rather than all of them at the same time. So good point. Yeah, please.
So referring to question about the database, I'm interested in because in order to query any data from this sheet in the script that we presented, you have to do it Google Script.
That's one way.
Library, something like that. So is there any kind of querying language for it, or have you like join roles from different sheets, or to answer this question, I'm like, sorry for that. Still interested in that, if there is any kind of language that would allow some more advanced queries.
The question from the audience was about how to query the data and how to efficiently join it, and well, continue modeling based on the things we already have in the Google Sheets. It really depends on how far you want to take this data, because, for example, in the app script that I presented, everything was calculated within one single sheet. I think it took a few variables from different sheets for like things about details of the vendors and things like that, but it is usually operating within one object. But it is possible to connect several sheets and query data from them. So in a way you could have, if we're only limiting ourselves to the Google Workspace, you could have like a master sheet which is connected to other ones and no one has access to that, and then have a query working in that one. But as I said in the beginning, it is about how far we want to take our data. It can, because, for example, some of the things in our corporate reporting, as we know, like, well, most of the finances and like managers, they love their spreadsheets. And a lot of things do happen through there. So actually there are like plenty of Python libraries and Java libraries which connect to Google Sheets, and they extract data from it, and then they, well, because it is already normalized, most of it, of course, like we have to do some homework. If it's just odd cells in the sheet, it will not be working very well. But if it is more or less normalized, it can be pulled out and then pushed into a database, and that's it. Then your sheet acts only as a source, and there you can use normal joins you're familiar with, or continue operations directly in Python. So in that sense, it's quite a flexible tool. And even within Google Sheet, you could use queries. You could use selects, you could use group bys and things like that. So in that it's slightly more powerful than Excel in that sense, because it allows you to write little queries and operate with named ranges. So it kind of tackles that as well.
Yeah, can I ask you to answer one question in the chat online?
Of course, of course. Which one?
The last one, it is only one.
Okay. Let me scroll.
To the end, yeah.
When talking about data and data collection, particularly in the web industry, companies sometimes expose certain sockets which can be cached and used when accessing other websites, such as those with advertisements. How can we manage data collection so that it is not preferentially treated for services or companies that have paid for it? And should data collection be regulated to ensure fair competition for web advertisements? That was a long question. Okay, let me think about it and maybe reread it again. I don't have a good answer for that. I have not personally worked with like sourcing data through like web data. But I guess if we stick to the principles we have discussed before, here it can be about potentially exposing ourselves to more data and more sources. So if we want to avoid some preferences, then maybe it is a good idea to have a overall like, dictionary of what is applicable to a certain region, to a certain industry and things like that. And then, of course, apply what we can to that. But I mean, this is a very specific question. Unfortunately, I cannot give you a more accurate answer right now. Yeah, sorry, but thank you.
Thank you, Gil. I
Piotr.
think that we can go with one more question from the hall, and then we need to break.
Max?
I have a proposal for a project, not a question. I believe you will be asked similar question about like how much you can scale this approach, this schema, this demo. So I propose you maybe with my help just to do a stress testing with big data. Just pick up like some similar schema and the project to fulfill it with a bunch of data and see where are the points, where are the bottlenecks, and see what are the limits, like thousands, millions levels, something. It might be interesting, and you might have answer for future.
For sure. No, thanks, Max. The question/proposal from the audience was about how we could stress test our setup by potentially just funneling a lot of data into it. And I guess my usual approach of pressing add 1000 rows, maybe it wouldn't work so well right here. But I am actually, yeah, I'm interested. I'll take you up on that. Thank you, Max. There was one more question. I'll just take that. Oh, sorry, there was the one right here.
Right. So, what would you recommend the casual user how to protect our data when we are living in that century, when we are lost in that whole data? If actually we can keep it safe.
Safe. The question from the audience was about how can we ensure that we can keep our data safe in our modern age. Yeah, I guess immediately I have friends of mine appearing in my head who are like extremely elusive of all the main services and everything. So I guess the best way to keep yourself safe and your data safe would actually to be excluded from the modern society in some sense. So if you want to live in a monastery and you want to be fully like off the grid, then you are going to be data free in some sense, but then in a way like some data, even about like your name, your preferences and everything, you would still potentially share it with some other people. So it's only about the extent to which you're ready to go with it. But if we were to be more realistic and like not all of us want to live in a monastery, I think potentially staying off the grid in some way, like of the social platforms, and potentially using a device never connected to the internet and things like that, it could solve some of your concerns. I'm not sure whether it will be very practical if you still want to reap all the benefits, but then still kind of keep yourself as secretive as possible. So it's a bit. Yeah, it could be good. There was a proposition from the group about having a digital avatar, and that's one way to go forward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Implies some mapping, yeah. Elvina?
Yes, thank you, Gil. I'm sorry that I interrupt you, but we need to connect to the next speaker. But you can discuss everything during the networking part. For now, we need to go for 8-10 minutes break. Guys, in the hall, you can go to take some drinks and snacks and discuss everything with Gil. In the meantime, we will connect the next our speaker, Piotr, with his test culture topic. Thank you.
Will be instead of the clicker. So, good evening. Thank you for coming and staying up so late. Can you hear us well online as well?
Yep.
Yeah. We
Yes.
cannot hear. Yes. Great. Good. So, welcome those who are watching us online as well. My name is Piotr Kalachyn, and today I want to talk about the culture of testing. The name is not so clear. Either we're testing culture or it's a culture of testing, and that was meant to be like this. I'm not so friendly with presentation. So it's about testing. No, it's related to software development. So what I want to talk about is why testing is an important part of software development and software projects, and why we as software developers need to embrace these practices. And also how it benefits the managers of software development projects. So who here is a software developer? I don't know the audience, yeah, quite a few of us. And who is a project manager or investor? Also a few, or you want to be. Okay, so we talk about culture this evening, and in general, in grid dynamics, we talk a lot about culture, and it can be frightening in the beginning, especially if it's your first experience in a corporation. You think, oh, they have corporate culture. Not only I have to go and work there 8 hours a day or more, but also I'm supposed to change my culture or adopt some values I don't like and so on. So I understand the horror. But actually, just like data can be seen on different scales, culture can also be seen on different scales. And we can think of a culture of a nation or country. We can also think about some groups, subcultures, countercultures. And this is basically some ways of doing things that have certain values behind them, certain motivations. And if we as humans, we can pick it up from our parents, our peers, our friends, and by picking up practices, we get the whole package at once. And then we don't have to discover the whole world from the atom or Big Bang or before. So this is a quick way for us humans to learn and get up to speed with some methods. So the benefits of it is when you have acquired some culture, you picked it up, you don't have to reinvent the wheels, because there will be situations, let's say it's table culture. You're at the table, you don't have to think how to put my elbow on the table or under the table, or should I maybe lean on my knees because it's comfortable. Yeah? If you have it kind of adopted, then you know that you keep your elbows close to the body, and the benefit is that you don't knock over some glassware, or you don't nudge people you don't want to nudge. So we can say culture is a set of good practices. And this is what my presentation is about, the good practices related to testing. Yeah. And what do I know about it? Why am I speaking today? I've been in the software development business for over 30 years, but it wasn't until some 5 years ago that I actually started to write tests and see testing as part of my profession. Yeah, because I always thought, well, I'm not a tester, I'm a developer. So I create bugs. I don't, well, maybe I fix them. Yeah. But later I realized that it's actually part of the things I do. And it's, well, before that, for quite a long time, I started developing software for the Belarusian Academy of Science, where I lived at the time. I come from Russia and Belarus and moved to Poland 16 years ago. So I developed, together with friends, different applications for businesses, energy industry, non-governmental organizations, art groups, many things. And working full stack before the concept appeared, and before the front end and back end appeared as such. And recently, over the last 5-7 years, I'm focused on the front end. And only when I joined a larger company, I realized that testing is part of the process, part of the game. And this was the motivation why I decided to talk about it. And today, I will not be speaking about technology, about certain library and techniques, how to build tests. It's about culture. It's about what it is about, what is best to do it, and how best to do it, what to take into account, and so on. And the culture part of it is that when you begin to develop software, you want to play, maybe you like to play with computers, and then you realize that you can actually make them do something. You begin to program. And you're so happy when you kind of create your own first feature and it finally works and a button begins to, you can click it, it's clickable at last, and something appears and disappears. So you're focused on this effect, and you are focused on the happy path scenario as a developer. And then if somebody tells you, well, did you write test? Why? What are you talking about? Yeah, I just like to play. I like to make things happen. And it's only when we begin to develop software commercially and with a group of other developers, and we wanted to actually make money. Only then we realize, okay, we better cover our six and protect against something, because, yeah. And here we need some critical mind. Yeah, it's the sunny day is fine, but we need to look at the dark side. And I want to use the quote from Leonard Cohen, a great poet with a great guitar who I love, and probably one of the most iconic songs by him has this line: "Your faith was strong, but you needed proof." And so on. Yeah. So we believe our software works, but we also want to make sure. Yeah? Just like nobody wants to, drive an untested car, a model that never had a crash test or other kinds of tests. So a bit of surrealism for the culture. Whoever can solve the riddle first will get the first prize.
Black box testing counter.
Yes. What else? 2 of 3. Okay, we'll come to it later. There's something around them. Cucumber has to do, of course. And black box is all about testing. So we'll go through why we need to test, what kind of testing is there, how tests can serve as documentation of your project, how they can be used in agile development that we most likely work in 2024 most of the time. And we'll go through best practices and common pitfalls. So the answer to the question, what could possibly go wrong, is
Everything.
Everywhere, all at once. Yeah. So we need to make sure our software is ready for it, because it will go wrong. Recently in Wrocław, we had a test of our flood resilience, and we passed it very well. And this is what we can call testing on production. This is for real heroes. This is how a beginner developer tests. And looking back, I was preparing for this presentation, I was looking back at the 90s, okay, dates me, but we were developing a hierarchical graphical database for the energy system of Belarus, like all the power plants. Chernobyl was already down, but all other power plants and the grids and the transformer stations, they were like presented as you could zoom in fractally and show them without a single unit test. Yeah, I say really commander style. I wouldn't do it now. Luckily, it wasn't controlling this. It was just, showing it. So we could more or less allow it. And testing obviously is part of quality assurance. It's not identical, but it's a great part of it. And one can argue, do we always need to put some budgets into testing and some effort, some team members, allocate some team members for that or not? And there are always pros and cons. I don't believe that relative things can be absolutely this or that. So just like more transparency gives us less privacy, as we mentioned, and more data comes with the cost of data and the secrecy, privacy concerns. Just in the same way, testing gives you some extra values, but everything comes at a cost. And it will cost you time, management, and money, and infrastructure. So if you're working on a proof of concept, or if you're just learning some things, you may skip testing. You just, but whenever it becomes a product that you want to market, if you don't want your web application to behave like what's called Billet Intercity PL, this site that always complains that you have another tab open with the same application for years. If you don't want your application to behave like that, you need some testing. Unless you are a state-owned monopolist, and then you don't care. Then you can save some money on that. But in the free market, you obviously need. And it's not always so, it's not always about luxury of actually making more money or less money, saving a little bit or not. Sometimes this saving money on development is not the concern at all. With some budgets, if your client is a multi-billion revenue company, and you say, okay, we'll implement this feature and it will save you 100 hours of development. They will look at you and say, 100 hours of development is change, it's breakfast money. I'm not concerned about saving that. I'm concerned into making more billions and staying in the market in the first place. And if we're talking about a hospital application or a railway, or actually systems that control nuclear power plants, then we want extra redundancy, extra testing, and we'll also metrics. Like it's part of the data culture. You don't want a car that doesn't show you the fuel level, right? Or oil, especially, maybe oil. So we have this telemetry. It's called a dipstick that you pull out of your oil tank, and you see the level of oil, some pre-digital telemetrical system. And also you want metrics on your dashboard that you see what's happening, the speed, the oil level, and so on. And similarly, you also want testing and some safety measures. And testing will not make your application better, or maybe, let's say, it will not make it nicer, and it will not make it more performant, but it will make it more stable, more robust, obviously. So recently I had this physical world testing. There was an air intake pipe that was to be installed in the house. The pipe that brings oxygen from the air outside to a fireplace. And it has a slope so that the water that condenses can flow out. And the guy who installed it said, well, it's good level. I said, yeah. Is it really Does it have this 2-degree slope? Yeah, it looks like this. Okay. I said, okay. Ready? And I poured a glass of water into it. And it didn't flow out. So what would happen if I didn't test? We would pour concrete over it, and after that, it would be impossible to bend the PCV pipe. Yeah? So testing saved us quite a lot of money, and the function could be implemented. Yeah. Okay, so this is the testing on production, but at an earlier stage. It's called user acceptance testing, where the environment is actual. It's the actual pipe that is actually starting to work in a few days, but the environment was not some kind of laboratory. Okay, so kinds of testing. As software developers, we mainly deal with unit tests, but there's also end-to-end tests when the whole application is tested, API tests that test the backend part or server side of the whole setup. Manual testing is not something we develop. It's a certain separate skill. Automated testing, when we want the test to be thorough, and we want a machine to be meticulous and not lazy and run the test over and over again at different environments. Integration testing that tests how different systems work altogether. A/B testing, mentioned by Gio in his presentation, is when we can compare features. Regression testing, after we introduce some new features, we want to make sure the old ones still are with us. Mutation testing is actually testing for tests when we want to make sure that our tests actually discover defects in the software. Load testing is checking if things work under normal load, and stress testing, 97, 2024, when things go above the normal level. Just had a roof in my house, or maybe I'm creating noises by holding it in my hand. Sorry for that. Can you hear me if I put it on the table? Probably,
Yes,
yeah?
you can.
Yes, good. So thank you for rustling it with my hand. Yeah, so again, normal load testing is when you have a roof and you have a rain and you see, okay, the roof is not leaking. This is load testing. What happened a few weeks ago, it was stress testing when the load is higher than normal, both in the amount of records, as Maxim mentioned, and also amount of, let's say, hits or interactions happening at the same time. Different criteria.
Could you also elaborate about the difference between end-to-end and integration test?
Integration testing it doesn't have to be end-to-end. You can check the integration of several systems, but maybe they are included one into another. Again, or maybe not again, but the first time, a disclaimer, I'm not a QA, let's say, specialist. I'm a UI developer primarily, and I don't sell any particular library for testing, and I don't advocate for any particular brand. It's just I enjoy this culture of integrating testing into development and into the life cycle of a software. So unit tests, there we treat a component as a black box. And in this situation, we isolate a component to check it. It's the opposite of integration testing or end-to-end testing. It's like in the physical world, we can compare it with taking out an engine from a car, or even taking an engine before it was put in a car and putting it on a test stand or whatever it's called in English. And there we can test the engine alone. We don't care how it actually spins the wheels. We just want to see how it rotates and burns fuel or whatever, does whatever it's supposed to do. Yeah. So for that reason, for a unit test, we need a specific environment in which they execute it. There's this, it's called test bed, or with a car, it's probably, at least in Russian, it's called a test stand, where we fix a component and we emulate its interaction. And we take it as a black box. So we create an artificial environment, shortcut certain, feed certain data into its input and check the outputs. And important here is that we are agnostic of how it does what it does. We just need to check that what it does, how it behaves. Know how it does it, but what it does. Yeah. So unit tests give us the illusion of safety that all the units out of which our software is made are working fine. Because sometimes a change in
I think people are complaining about the volume.
About the volume, it is too quiet. Is it better now? Should be, yeah.
For me, it is okay even in that position.
You are breaking up. Okay, but you're also clear, loud at least. Okay, okay. I'll try to speak into the microphone. Yeah. So because our units use dependent units, sometimes a change in one place can discover that we fix one function, but we change something in the behavior of our black box, and as a result, another function breaks. So for that reason, we need to cover the edge cases when we create a unit test. Not just focus on the happy path, but actually mention all kinds of situations that can appear. Yes. So it looks like a unit test is actually a piece of software with a human readable outcome that we can then see as a report. And this shows us which module, which unit in our software is not building or not behaving as expected. So this is the first kind of safety frontier after we develop a feature as a developer. And there are different opinions. Some developers say, okay, I will develop this feature, and later in a separate ticket, a separate task, I will create unit tests for it. In my experience, it never works well. Firstly, it doesn't look good for the client, because then you are burning hours or spending money, but developing something that brings no business value. So it's harder to sell. So as a, let's say, maybe not a developer, but as a team lead, when you begin working on a pitch, on a proposal to the client, you need to make sure that testing culture is included in the product. So to ensure robustness and stability of the system, we will be developing unit tests as part of the value delivered. Yeah? And then you say, okay, I need 1.5 days for the functionality and half a day for tests. And it's when you say 2 points instead of 1.5, this doesn't sound so painful to the client or the Scrum Master or whoever on the client side you talk to. But you, as developer, will have this peace of mind, and the client will actually get tested software. I'm talking about it because this negotiation is often part of the business, especially when the client is not from the IT world. Like I've been with Grid Dynamics for more than 3 years, and one customer was Google. Obviously, it's an IT giant. So then I didn't have to explain why testing is important. They had a requirement that everything had to be covered with tests. And it even to me, it looked like overhead and bureaucracy. But sometimes the client is from the, let's say, retail world or a kind of less digital world, and they say, what, but why do you need to test? You are professionals. You're supposed to write software that doesn't have bugs. We don't pay for bugs. So we need to be prepared for this kind of conversation and smuggle testing into the whole project for the sake of the client, the software, and ourselves. Because if we don't do it in the beginning, then we will create some units, some features. And then they will start to crumble. They will, if they are not covered with tests. And if we then come to the client and say, okay, actually, we wanted to save you a few $1,000s and created a lot of bugs. And maybe now you give us some budget for testing. Yeah? This will put us in the bad light. If we, from the beginning, behave professionally and say we need this extra safety, then the whole project will, the atmosphere will be much better, and the software will be much better. Yeah? So it depends on the client if we need to sell tests with our software or not. Yeah, so back to the culture. Certain things, let's say a student or an amateur will never invent themselves, because if you are working on your own and you're creating your own product, then even version control is Git branch. Yeah, I work on master and I just push commits at best. Yeah? But I also remember a wild situation, Wild West, when you deploy something by just uploading new files over FTP and putting them into folders. I don't know if anyone here had this experience ever. Yeah, you know the pain. Yeah, maybe when you upload, it's not so bad, but the rollback is where you say, but how? Yeah, because it's like climbing. You know, it's much easier up than down, because you just see this goal and you rush ahead, and then suddenly things go wrong. With data, it's especially painful because you need not only migration, but you need a rollback migration. And to program that, it's probably quite a setback. Yeah, you know, you spend a lot of time, and hopefully frameworks take care of it. Yeah, so Git deployment, like version control. Okay, let's not pretend any other. Let's forget about other version controls. It's usually Git in 99% of the cases. Git helps this. It can deploy and roll back, redeploy. Well, it goes nice. But to compare software development without unit tests and without other kinds of testing, especially unit tests, it's like uploading with FTP. It's very amateur, and you don't know what's happening where. Okay. And unit tests usually, most of the time, in most cases, they focus on how units behave, what inputs they receive, and what outputs they give. But an important part of unit testing is visual confirmation or matching reference, which is done by creating snapshots of your isolated components. Well, I'm talking about the UI development, where the visual side is relevant. Probably on the backend side, you don't benefit from some PNG files generated from your output. But for UI, this is part which is often overlooked. And your button can be on the web page or in the document. It is clickable. It does what it's supposed to do. But if the picture is wrong, then it may happen that your button is actually down there below the visible viewport. and the user will simply not see it and go away from your beautiful web application. So snapshotting, a way to generate a picture of how the component looks and being able to compare it pixel by pixel with a certain margin of error is a great way to make sure that the application not only behaves but looks as it's supposed to. Okay. So what's next? Coverage. What's the optimal coverage of tests? It's a very good interview question. I had it many times. So 85%. Good. Any other opinions? 100. Okay, we'll comment on that.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Okay. 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 But I also had something like 50-60% is probably the optimum.
I think also it depends on the criticality of the application. So let's say, for example, you have like an application that is very critical. I don't know, some billing system, something really critical. So I think it wouldn't be the same with maybe some, I don't know, application for checking whether, although lately it's also becoming more critical, yeah. But yeah, I think it depends on maybe the criticality, and then you would just decide which percentage could be acceptable, and of course budget.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but this I said in the beginning. You don't need testing if you're on a budget, probably.
About coverage. So at least it should be
there.
At least.
Okay. Something has to be covered.
Because if it's more than zero, then you have CI/CD setup, and people with proper culture will write the tests. They will have ability to write the test without setting up everything from scratch. So if it's like 1%, it's already a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree. 1 is better than 0. Yeah.
I would just add to my statement that
doesn't matter.
I would argue that you can have 100% coverage, but it doesn't mean that you test all the edge cases and so on.
Absolutely.
And you can have 60% and you test more than 100% tests you doesn't test those edge cases. But because the quality of the test is better, just the test go to every line of the code.
Great. I personally agree with 85-ish, kind of. Why not 100%? Probably a few percent of an average application are very high order components. The application component itself and some kind of feature modules. And testing them will not be essentially a unit test. It will be more like an integration test. And to make a proper test of such thing, we need to create a lot of mocks. So it kind of falls out of the purpose of unit tests. And this is where this golden 85 comes. It kind of allows for a certain margin. And as for edge cases, of course, you can cheat the statistics back to data culture and have a very nice report, but it will not cover the edge cases. And it also depends on what we count coverage, in which units we. 80% of files, 80% of functions, or 80% of statements or lines of code. If a statement is broken up in 10 lines of code, then maybe it's a different statistics. So opinionated, I prefer to count it by statements, which steps of execution happen. And I give a margin of personally less than 10% for those non-unit tests, and 85 is often a standard threshold that we're supposed to hit. But if I'm doing a technical interview, and I'll be happy to do an interview with some of you maybe in the future, and I ask, what's the optimal coverage for you? And someone says, well, 50, 60%. And it sounds like, you know, not too much, not too little, kind of this, not too sweet, you know. Then I say, okay, there's no criteria, there's no substance behind it. Actually, when do we have a picture here? Yeah, this is a safe screenshot from an actual project that Ivan and myself are working on. Nothing confidential. And we have this tool called V-Test, and it has this coverage report. And in green, it shows statements that are covered. And there's a pink, reddish edge case, which is not. So this is great, because then you can actually visually check what is not covered. And you can decide, okay, this is an unlikely scenario when something goes wrong. And it doesn't matter if I show a dash or an empty space in this case. So I can let it be. I don't have to also burn unreasonable hours testing irrelevant things. So this is another 5% of 100. But it's good to at least have this report and realize that, okay, I have areas in my application that are not tested at all. So maybe it's good to create an extra ticket for that. Manual testing is not to be excluded. However, we automate our testing. Manual testing is a different mindset. And, you know, in this ideal agile world, we're all supposed to be replaceable. We develop and we test and we create tickets and we groom tasks, and we can all step in and cover for a Scrum Master on vacation. But in reality, the mindset of a developer is always focused on the happy end scenario, happy path, sunny day, as we call it. And a good manual tester is this critical mind that splits hair and looks for the hole in the hole, and, you know, goes the way that the developer will never allow anyone to go. You know, you're abusing my beautiful software. It's a separate skill. It's a different profession. So it's good to cross-test each other's tickets, components, whatever features we develop. And in my team, for example, we decided that code review also includes so-called dev test. You as a developer, you pull the branch, you put it on the workbench and show me what you got. And actually, maybe half the time we discover a bug that the happy developer overlooked. Yeah? So that's before it goes to testing, to testers, to the QA. So I have a story of a manual test. I have a quick digression. My original company that I founded back in Minsk, originally to develop some scientific and business software, but we ended up developing games for touchscreen machines. And we had an intern that just returned from a maternity leave, and she wasn't a brilliant developer, so she was kind of half-time office manager. But then we realized that she played so well that whenever we brought the new game online, she would become #1 in the kind of international online competition of that. And she became a brilliant tester because she was the only one who could actually win the game and show us, the developers and the music developers and artists, how it looks when you win, what it plays, how it looks, and you know. So it's a great skill, and it's part of the team that must be there. You cannot, just like you cannot let software developers design the graphics interface, you cannot let developers test. Yeah. We see the software as our child. It's too sentimental. Okay, so best practices and common pitfalls. I would like to start with data. Again, a reference to the previous topic. Very often, a well-curated data is required for testing. And when you enter something, it may look completely different from the actual data. So the best is to use data that has the same shape, the same melody, maybe not the same lyrics, as Gio said, so that we test as close to the actual setup a configuration as possible. Sometimes we might enter 3 rows of text where the actual business requirement is 2 pages, and the interface will look completely and behave completely different. So I put 3 qualities here. The data should be realistic, valid, and decent, meaning demoable. And so realistic, it has to have the same amounts and the same diversity as the data you are going to be working with. So you can test pagination, you can do a little bit of load testing at the same time. Valid. The data should be relevant. Recently, in a project, we had a situation that the data was automatically generated in huge amounts, but the data itself would break the features that we developed. And it looked like the software is very buggy, but it wasn't. It just, the data wasn't coherent. So it created, it consisted of combinations of like shapes of data objects that would not be encountered in real life. Huh? Like you have a giraffe on, I don't know, rhinoceros legs, and you feed it with a house, and the house is great, but then in the actual giraffe will not fit there. So we have something like this, kind of distorted data that created a lot of false negatives, because we were getting a lot of bugs that are not caused by the software, not caused by normal use. Decent is very important for software developers, and project managers also should bear it in mind. I would say the culture of dealing with data is whenever you test, don't use random strings, like obviously the famous ASD and QWE, or swear words. Yeah, very often software developers are sociopaths, hate talking to people using their mouth. They just prefer to sit in the cellar and program in the dark. These Dracula types. And when they test and they create entries in the database, there's a fair chance there will be some obscenity instead of a first name and last name. And it may be innocent when you are working on your local branch, but I would say forget this habit. Just always put some kind of straight data. Think, what if the client sees this at a demo next week? You don't want your data to be obscene. So realistic, valid, and demoable. The best way usually is to take actual data from production, because it will consist of the proper amounts, the distribution will be the same, and so on. But there we run into the privacy thing. We don't want to leak customers' data. So scrambling, garbling, anonymizing comes into play. Also, it's good to have conventions that allow you to identify test data from the data set, especially on some higher stages. Let's say user acceptance. They begin to work and create some actual records in the database, but at the same time, you run your automated tests on that data, and they introduce new records. So you need to be able to clean up when a test fails. You do it end to end, but it doesn't come to an end, and you end up with 1,000 dummy records in your database. So a simple option is to add a prefix to IDs that you can run a query and delete those fake records quickly, so that otherwise the entries can look and feel like real data. Another thing that connects testing and data is to have a way to quickly populate your software with dummy data. You can write a script that does that, especially if you work with long dependent forms. To fill them up manually is tiresome, so you have just a shortcut, Control M in this example, and bang, a longer form, not this trivial one, but a longer form is all populated with valid data. And when we are talking about CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, and A/B testing, when we compare how a new feature will look, and it's practically impossible to do without so-called feature toggles or experiment flags. And this, unfortunately, is not a very popular culture in developing software. And once I learned it the hard way. It's a huge client, and they had it as a standard. To introduce a feature, you had to go to a special office, order a new experiment flag, receive the flag, introduce it to your code, actually create a lot of ifs branch. If this flag is on, your software does this. If it's off, it does the normal way. So you add the ifology to your code, and then you have to create a cleanup ticket to say, okay, I will go through my code and remove this logic. So you also put the reference to this cleanup ticket in all those branches. So it felt like huge bureaucracy, and it was slowing me down. But later, when I joined a project which didn't have experiment flags at all, I said, guys, but how do you work without experiment flags? I said, why? We just enjoy merging conflicts. It's fun. You develop a feature, you don't want the users to see it on production because it's raw. You haven't developed it. So you have your branch for a couple of months, and you sit on this branch. And then when time comes to user acceptance test, you just rebase your branch on develop, and you have a lot of conflicts, and you spend several stressed nights resolving the questions, drinking coffee and swearing. And is there a high chance you introduce a few free bugs in the process? Yes, it will cost you nerves and so on. And also, during these 2 months, you say, do we have a function that does this and that? And somebody says, yeah, I just created this function that does exactly what you need. And you say, great, can I rebase on something? And I say, yeah, actually I have it on my branch. It's not even on develop. And so a team is developing very good functions separately, and they cannot benefit from it. So an alternative is to actually take the trouble, spend a few days, create some nice screen with toggles that you can control new features, and then you can merge every ticket into the main trunk, whatever it's called, master or main, or just the monorepo or whatever it is. And then the benefits, you can actually show it early to your team. You can show it to trusted users on the user acceptance environment. And then when it's really ready, really ripe, you can begin to roll it out gradually to some audiences, maybe first in Lower Silesia, and then maybe in Western Poland, Central Europe, and then general availability, GA, 100% rollout. How do you do it without the code actually being in your code base? There's no way. Yeah? So in this way, you continuously integrate with the code and you deliver continuously. First, you do the dog food testing when you begin to use the product yourself, but you can probably, I don't know, let's say, install it on your phone and try to use it in a real situation. Let's go dog food because somebody ate dog food to check if it's good. Then there's team food when the whole team does it, and then trusted users and so on. So you have this option to roll out gradually. So this is, of course, generated by, you know what? So these are not actual words and letters, but you get the picture. You have a screen where you can turn certain features on and off. Ideally, you have backend server support for it so that you can roll it out you can control who has access to features and who doesn't. But even if it's something in the UI of your application while you are in the development phase, it will also benefit. Yeah, so testing in agile environment. There is this QA, I don't know if it's labeled. There is a seat at the table for QA. If the customer doesn't understand it, we need to make sure. But in 2024, it's very often that the QA team the size of a front end or back end team. So the awareness is coming through. And the agile part in it is how to make the development smoother. Is the QA can actually be involved in creating the tasks because they know how they're going to test it. So if they understand the business requirement, while the developers traditionally are focused on the happy path, the QA begins to rub their hands and say, aha, and we will test it like this and like this and like this, and this is this acceptance criteria and this edge case, and they can actually start working on the automation tests before the developers deliver their software. But let's say if we take Scrum or Agile, it's nice to begin and finish a set of tickets in one sprint, in one iteration. And very often what happens, the developers begin coding away in the beginning of the sprint, then they get blocked, they begin to fix some things, they want to deliver perfect software. So closer to the end of the sprint, there's an avalanche of ready features dumped on the QA team, which is sometimes one person or a few people. And they have these extra nights of coffee and sugar. The result is, of course, a poorly tested software, tickets that roll over to the next sprint, and so on. So this is not very agile. So instead, what can be done, of course, we can split the tickets into testing tickets and development tickets, or do it partially. Let's say we consider a ticket done if it passes manual tests, but the automation test will be written later in the next sprint. And so every sprint begins to breathe more and more normally. So the QA team get their a set of tasks they can start working on at the beginning of the sprint. But manual testing is still can be seen as part of the actual ticket, and only then it's considered done. And there's one picture that brings us back to the riddle in the beginning. Cucumber and gherkin. Same thing, but in different flavors. Gherkin, for those who know, is a language that describes the behavior of a system, not necessarily software. And this is a human-like language where each line begins given or when, and or, and so on. So we describe the scenarios like this is a sample of Gherkin code. It reads English. The feature is called user login, and it has a description in the familiar form. As I this and that, I want to this and that so that I can benefit in a certain way. And then there is a set of scenarios. The thing is that although it looks like English, these words, these lines have a certain meaning, and then it can be used as such just to describe behavior. And this is a great way to clearly outline the acceptance criteria for a task or the behavior of a system. But the fun begins when we use Cucumber, which is a layer that connects this human-like language with programming language, with your automation system, and actually executes these human lines of pseudocode as actual steps as automation. I remember working on this and creating steps definition for Cucumber and libraries of these steps that you can reuse. And the vision is that we have a common language in the team that can be understood by the product owner, the scrum master, the developer, and the tester alike, and can be sent to the QA automation software to be executed. Well, it's a very high ideal. Does anyone know has an example when a project manager actually begins to create these test scenarios that get executed? I don't think so, because with code, you also need versioning, you need tickets, and they may not know it. But at least this is something that can be passed around and exchanged and can formalize the way we describe the system. Yeah, and of course, trivial, I think we all do it. We can ask generative AI to cover code with unit tests. So actually, if we had time, we could just ask a chatbot to generate some code, and I'm sure it will cover it with thorough edge cases. Somehow it works magically, but I don't think we need to go into it. So, any comments, questions, suggestions, please?
Okay, so
okay.
Start. I would kind of argue with this statement at the beginning that test necessarily comes with extra cost, because just to provide two examples, when I used to work for the company across the street, and we were processing a lot of data and so on, like as a developer, developing new features without some kind of separated tests required a lot of like running the whole engine and processing a lot of data and so on and so on, just in order to get into the place, to the line of code where I was developing. So that's how I myself learned to write.
To love tests, yes.
Yeah. So, and it speeds up the development itself. So the first thing is it depends on how we use them. And the second example would be like shortening the feedback loop, comparing like unit tests, getting to know about regression from unit tests compared to production, first tire, second tire, third tire.
It's who do you want to get the news from?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that being said, I wonder, like that's the examples and some kind of intuition. But I wonder if you know any kind of metrics or measurement methodologies on how we can actually measure efficiency,
productivity of a team.
After, after introducing such advanced and test culture into the whole project and software level development lifecycle in general. Is it measured?
I think it's observable, but it's probably difficult to measure because if there is a data leak because of the fault and 3 billion users have the data leak, this is probably tens of billions of dollars fine, right? Am I in the right ballpark? There was recently a fine to a huge company. I don't remember, but anyway, this is a lot of money. So to measure the productivity of a team is something more narrow, of course, because we do not consider the dangers of a power plant exploding somewhere or weather report can be something unimportant. But believe me, if it's a let's say sales company that sells construction materials, they depend on the weather very strongly. Below 5 degrees with certain materials, you cannot use it. So and if your warehouse is full of that, then you have a huge loss. But it's of course not such a big deal compared to an explosion. Yeah. So to narrow it down to productivity would be interesting to measure. I do believe that it increases the productivity because of a much shorter feedback loop. How to measure? I don't know. It's difficult to run an A/B test to have the same group of developers developing the same software without tests and with.
Yeah, I mean that's why.
Yeah.
I put a lot of thoughts in that part because I do believe in like productivity increase, but like I cannot find the answer. That's why I'm also like here.
No, productivity increased when you're actually used to write unit tests and you kind of do this quite quickly.
Yeah, but
it's
that's
not taking days and days.
Yeah.
And then when you kind of like trying to support this culture in your company, it feels like you're an adult, like telling a child that it's bad to eat too much candies and you need to eat better food.
Yeah, it's very difficult to sell. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can only like learn it in a hard way.
Yeah, and that's the point. That's like my point because you were talking about like convincing the management to use it and having some kind of
a lot of kind of good things. Actually, most of good things on the project are done in secret. Because you cannot sell it. So some refactoring, unit tests, other thing. But for unit tests, I can tell that I never sleep so well when I have coverage. So like even if you like wake up at night like whoa, like this case I had that.
Yeah, but, yeah.
That's
okay, but
fine.
you are a developer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the management and like convincing them that it's worth the investment.
Yeah, here with the managers, there's a simple leverage that they don't want trouble on their shift. So I say, okay, you can go commando and risk it, but actually the reputation of the company is at stake.
Okay, so maybe not management, but the customer.
Customer is more difficult because they they order the music, they pay the money. So it takes some diplomacy.
Yeah, but because I'm trying like thinking that comparing it to security, like it's hard to like, but there are approaches on how to measure like how much you can save if you invest in security improvements comparing to the potential accident on the production and the keys and so on and so on. And I don't see like the same wave of like trying to measure impact of test culture to the development itself. So
well, with the customer, you can see what they drive, and say, let's say it's Volvo, and show them some films about car crashes of Volvo and how they're crazy about testing, and say, do you enjoy your car? It passed a lot of tests. It's not because Volvo has bad engineers and they are not sure of their competence. It's because when we develop new things, they cannot become perfect from the beginning. So, but of course, with every customer, we find our own ways. Probably for us software developers, the main part is to convince the management to talk like this to the client. Yes, and for the cost that it actually saves the cost, yes, it does at the end of the day. But it's like with solar batteries. You need an investment to start saving in 10 years. So it's kind of this. You need to invest in the beginning to save more later. So it's the mentality of a rich person that sees the potential and possibilities. I think that was.
I have a question. Thank you, Piotr, for your great presentation. But before my question, I add some context. Let's imagine that you have a unique idea to the market, and it's evident that then time is your key value for that. You should provide as soon as possible your solution to the market. And when will you add test flow to your flow like the developer? And maybe do you have some experience with A/B testing like that in that solution?
I would add the testing config in the process of setting up a repo and the build process from the beginning, from the ground up. And A/B, yes, the feature toggles that I was talking about. Just even if it's a banal thing, like you change the width of a window, I say, what can go wrong? But depending on different alphabets, different settings of the font, you have 80 languages if you have a very international product. You have unpredictable diversity of screen sizes. So even if you manage to, if you have the best paid license of browser stack and you have tested everything everywhere, you still want to gradually introduce it. In my current project, I managed to convince the team that we need feature toggles, partly because it allows us to switch the mocking of backend when it's not ready, or when it's down. And that helped a lot. And once you have the infrastructure set up, adding a new feature toggle is a piece of cake. You just more or less copy paste. Yeah? When you have some code pointers to testing practices that you document in your team, and this is Ivan in my team it was his part to create a document. We mock this in this way, and here we have a special component that shortcuts inputs, let's say, and then you collect it from Lego pieces. Then it becomes simple. Then you focus on the business logic and not on the infrastructure. So testing, again, has its own libraries, and in your project, we then create our own libraries, and then we assemble from them, and then it becomes gradually easier and faster as the team develops. It's a normal Scrum or Agile dynamics. In the beginning of the project, the team is ramping up speed. Later, we see that the tickets become smaller and smaller and quicker done. And the same with tests.
And speaking about the exact moment when we should add tests, it's actually another approach when we use TDD. So we first develop tests, and then on that test we build the actual
Test-driven development, yeah. We begin with failing tests. Yeah, yes, it's the essence.
So this is that you kind of try and experiment. You don't know what you want. But
It's probably easier to do on the back end, I would argue, than the front end.
and where to add tests, when to add tests. So it's usually already added when you set up the project. So
with frameworks, yes.
And even like test for tests, it's already here, and you can just do not like neglect this. Usually, like first several months, you don't write tests, and they cover it with like meter of dust, and then writing a second test or a first test is really hard. I have a personal question. So we were speaking about 85%. What coverage percent you have in your pet project?
Pet projects, much lower, but it's non-zero. So it's that 1% that you were talking about. I actually use my pet projects mainly to hone some skills, and some of these skills are testing. So if I want to see how Storybook works, which combines, this library that combines the unit tests, visual snapshots, and end-to-end testing, then I don't want to just, install it to the project, the commercial project. I will begin experimenting on my pet projects. But yeah, I must say, not that much.
I have a question about AI. As you mentioned that you use for generating unit testing, right? So like you pass a file and it generates for existing code. Did you try to use AI for increasing reliability to generate cases? So for example, there could be me as a developer, I imagine 5 cases for this component and 5 for this, and AI maybe can generate 55 for component, and for example, cover cases run 2 times per million, for example, and so on.
Well, it obviously depends on. The question was if you can use AI to increase the reliability and edge case coverage of tests. So it depends on whether you have that many edge cases in your software, and also if you do, maybe it's a design warning. Maybe it makes sense to split codes into smaller units that are more independently testable. But also one thing that I wanted to mention and forgot, and thank you for that, is that as developers, we can create special handles and kind of technological holes to facilitate easier testing. Let's say we have 100 of buttons on a web page, and so it's a good idea to give a test ID value attribute to the button so that we can easily identify it in the document later. So to write code with the awareness to make it easier for the testing library to work with our components as black boxes, but kind of labeled name boxes. Yeah. What I noticed from generative AI, I usually use it for pure functions and not so much for UI components. So coverage for functions is probably about 70–80%, but coverage for UI components is much lower. I usually do manual testing and not unit tests. Yeah, so some software simply doesn't have that many edge cases to, and from what I noticed, when large language models generate unit tests, they do cover most of edge cases. Only sometimes I had to manually add an edge case that wasn't addressed by ChatGPT or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I like how many they are. They look good. Looks very thorough. Well, this is where we come into play and we check the tests. So.
But if you don't the way the AI is moving and we are seeing the exponential growth of this, do you think that it can replace developer or testers, or it will improve the way of working of developers?
Well, it's what we already have. Yeah, it's much faster to work now because we can, if not generate code with chatbots, but explore possibilities and use them as kind of interactive search engine. It's much easier to learn a new library or framework by using ChatGPT. It works faster. So they facilitate us. It's still good to have the business logic in mind. But you know, we will see. We will see if we have enough water to cool down the data centers and enough electricity to power them. I had these colossal costs, and I wanted to ask Gia about this. Also, this aspect of data, how expensive is, how high is the cost of ownership of data?
But just one more question. Data pollution. The way the data is generating when we have bulk of data, big data, and then terabytes, petabytes. And to store that data, the big corporations are using maybe ocean or some places they are keeping the data like glacier.
Yeah.
It is creating an ecological footprint on the environment. It's one of the potential reasons of global warming. So should the government or the corporation think about that we should control the data? Or...
Yeah, it does have a colossal footprint, of course, and just the amount of technology that allows us to share tens megapixels of cat pictures is incredible. This is the modern world with its grid for entertainment and also grid for data harvesting. We will see how it develops. But global warming is one thing. I'm not an expert on climate, but do we have actually? What's there? I'm running out of juice. Okay, maybe it's not my computer. It's something else. It's probably this.
Probably we are going to end the online part, so it is okay.
Do we have any questions online that we
can
cover?
Let me see.
Sorry,
yes.
one question regarding TD.
Yes. Can somebody read it, because it's really difficult for me to.
I think it was like, what's your take on the TDD?
TDD. I don't practice it myself. I respect the approach, but it's probably easier to test drive your development when you work purely with data. And it's probably not so easy when you create visual interfaces and you develop and you design them while developing. So actually, I never saw test-driven development of visual components.
What if you had provided UIs designs from UI designer, like would it work? Like taking the Figma screenshots
and feed it to the.
That's a test-driven expected outcome.
Yeah. From Figma, yeah. I think Figma-driven development is coming. What I enjoy is I have a kind of human test-driven development or behavior-driven development in the current project, and it works very well. The product owner actually describes functionality, discusses it with the business analyst, and they come up with Gherkin code, as I showed in my slides. So given the user comes to this page and clicks this button, then they see this. So this is a very clear way of expressing things. Then we as developers follow this as guidelines. I don't know if the QA directly copy this text, and they probably don't use Cucumber, so Gherkin is of no use for them. There's no connection from Gherkin to the QA. They write it in Java, as I said, but it's then very similar because you can just copy this Gherkin and use it as a pseudocode. You can comment it out and just follow each step and create code in your language. So you can be your own Cucumber to connect Gherkin with your library. Yeah. So.
Piotr, can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you breaking up, but.
Okay, I want to set that we need to end the online part and to go to the pizza.
No, it's. I don't think we can.
Adrian?
What do you think about test driven? Okay. Okay. So, but if you can hear me, then thank you very much, Elvina, for organizing it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us offline and online. It was a pleasure to be able to share with you as elements of culture. There was not much code this time, but thank you and see you later.